While everybody's getting settled, my name is Crystal Gilchrist. I am a transportation planner with Montgomery County Planning Commission. With me this evening is my boss, the Section Chief for Transportation, Matt Edmond, and the Chief Engineer for the project, Paul Linehan with Gannett Fleming. Paul also has some other folks from Gannett Fleming here as well to help answer your questions. There are also some local officials in the room, some municipal officials. Can all of you kind of raise your hand, municipal officials? There we go. You probably know most of them. Thank you for joining us this evening, and we're going to discuss the Ridge Pike Improvement Project here as we go forward. A couple quick announcements before we start the presentation. If you haven't signed in this evening at the sign-in table out in the lobby, please make sure we get your name and address and your email before we leave. We will be using email to communicate updates on the project, so if you want to get on that update list, we will need your email. Please try to be as legible as possible. I am not really good at interpreting some people's handwriting, so we'll leave that where that is. There's also a comment form on the back of the handout for this evening. You can either leave that with us here this evening in either of the comment boxes, or you can send it to the address on the front. There's also a website address on the front there, and you can go to that location for more information as the project goes forward. Currently, we just have some background information on the website at this point because we are not far enough along in the engineering to post any of that information. But we will populate more information to that website as we go forward. I do have a list of a few letters that bounced back to me. So if you didn't get a letter and you are abutting Ridge Pike, check that list and make sure that we have your correct mailing address. We take the addresses from the tax roll, so if you have a P.O. box as opposed to a street address, we might not have the right address for you. So if you didn't get a letter, please confirm we have your address. Finally, the two large plans in the side and the back, there are Post-it notes at each of those tables. If you think we missed something in those little blowouts that show the problems or the potential solutions, if we missed something, excuse me, put it on a Post-it note and stick it on the plan, and we'll get to it later this evening. So the presentation tonight is very preliminary. We are in the preliminary design phase of the project, which is quite lengthy, and then once we have a preliminary concept finalized, then we have another lengthy final engineering process. So we are very early in the process of getting this road fixed. Tonight we're going to see some background information, but we're also going to get some current updates on what we propose to go forward. And before my voice gives out completely, I'm going to let Matt Edmond take over and give you the background of the project.
First and foremost, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight, taking your time from your evening, from being with your families and dinner and everything to come out and hear a little bit about what we're doing and what we're up to. As Crystal said, my name is Matthew Edmond. I'm the Transportation Section Chief with the County Planning Commission. Crystal works for me. Also on my staff is Matt Popek and Janet Arcucci, who are, I believe, over there by the entrance. Gannett Fleming is our designer. As Crystal said, we have some municipal representatives from this room who I also want to thank for allowing us to be here, specifically the staff and supervisors from Whitemarsh Township. So most people don't know this, but Ridge Pike is a county-owned road. And if you're really into things like road ownership or road routes or whatever it might be, and there are folks like that out there, you would know that counties don't really own roads in Pennsylvania. It's very unusual. And not only that, but Montgomery County owns about 75 miles of road, most of which are major roads. So this portion of Ridge Pike from Philadelphia to Norristown is owned by Montgomery County. Most of Butler Pike is owned by Montgomery County. Most of Sumneytown Pike is owned by Montgomery County. Most of Easton Road is owned by Montgomery County. And these are roads that carry 10, 20, 30,000 people per day on them. So they're not small roads. And it's the county's responsibility to maintain these things, on a year-to-year basis, but also when there's major improvements that need to be made, it falls to us to do it. So that said, I know there's been many years in which the county's been trying to do some projects on Ridge Pike, and we actually have several projects along the whole length of Ridge Pike from Norristown to Philly. But the one that really matters for tonight is the piece from Crescent Avenue to the Philadelphia line, or Northwestern Avenue. And that's one that had been in design sort of off and on over the years. We got sidetracked when the Great Recession hit Money for the county kind of dried up. Money regionally, because we had it on the region's Transportation Improvement Program, which was a way that you fund projects like this with federal or state money, lessen the burden on yourself. The money in the tip, as we call it, that dried up too. And everything kind of went on hold for this project for many years. Well, we sort of regrouped the wagons and got together again and said, all right, we got a little bit of the way into that project, but not very far. And you know, the plans are 6, 7, 8 years old. Let's rethink this. Maybe there's a way we can start this project up, take a fresh look, minimize the amount of ground that we need, you know, put in the facilities that meet the needs of the mid-2015s. Thank you, Janet. Crystal, if you want, you can finish my, my water. I got ice in this one.
I like swill.
You know, come up with come up with a new project that meets the needs today rather than from 10 years ago. And so we went out and we got Gannett Fleming as our new engineer to do that work for us. And I want everybody to know a couple things tonight as we go into it before I turn it over to Paul to give you some details. Number one, we're here for 2 reasons. Number one is we want to inform the public, inform the community of what we're doing and what we're up to. So we've been meeting with township staff for both townships for about maybe 9 months, once a month. We've been collecting data, you know, how many cars are going down each road every day, where are they turning, what's the accident history, because that's the first thing you do. That's the first thing that you do in any project is you say, what's the conditions out there? What's the data? And then you make, you know, the best decisions you can from what the data is telling you. So we've been doing that for the last 9 months, and we want to tell everybody where we are with that. And the other thing too is that we put together a concept, and again, I want to stress that it's a concept. Crystal said we're in preliminary engineering. And in the world of engineering, that's the first step. You spend maybe 30% of your design trying to figure out what it is you want to do and where you want to do it, find where all the fatal flaws are and find ways to avoid them, so that by the time you get into the next step, which is called final design, which takes you all the way up to having a fully designed project, you're spending your time putting all the details together because you've already figured out where the problems are. There's nothing worse, as anyone knows, there's nothing worse than going through the end of a project and figuring out you did it wrong. I don't know about you guys, every once in a while I start tackling a woodworking project, and I'm always kicking myself when I get to the end and I realize I forgot to measure something the right way and I have to start all over. That's the same thing for us. So we wanted to lay out our concept for you guys, tell you where we've been, and then finally get some feedback. We've been meeting with a whole bunch of property owners up and down the stretch, people who we anticipate will be directly affected by the project by, you know, needing right-of-way or putting in something adjacent to their property. And we've gone out to them to say, you know, this is kind of what we're thinking. Give us your thoughts and your feedback. And we've actually made changes to our concept based on what some property owners who might be affected were telling us. So really tonight we're doing that writ large. We're coming to the public, to the community, to you guys, to say this is what we're thinking. You know, we know generally that this is what we want to do, but there may be some things where, look, you know, we're not going to be arrogant enough to say we know it all. We want your input and your feedback because maybe there's something that we miss. Maybe there is a piece of history or information we didn't know about that can help us come up with a better plan. So those are the 2 goals that we have for tonight. Number 1, tell you where we are, and number 2, get your feedback. The only other thing that I want to let everybody know is that we recognize that there's a bunch of goals that we have for this project, and this section of Ridge Pike is historic. It has structures, things close to the road. We know that it's not going to be easy, and so we've laid out a couple of goals for ourselves, and Paul's going to get into this in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. But we recognize that we need to do a couple things. Number 1, we want to try to alleviate the traffic bottlenecks that we have. And we know that one of the biggest ones in probably all of the county is the one just east of Church Road, right? Especially when the Schuylkill's down, that thing backs up for a very long time. And as Janet can attest, because she drives that way home to work sometimes, you can be sitting there for like 25 minutes and not go very far. So we want to improve the traffic situation. We also want to improve the safety because a road like Ridge Pike was laid out back in colonial times. People were driving wagons and horses. Nobody was going 50 miles an hour down a road. But things have changed. And so we know that there's some safety issues. While we're out here rebuilding the road, why don't we try to fix the safety? We also decided, we know this road's kind of shot, doesn't have good drainage, the pavement's beat. We can resurface this thing every 3 years so the cows come home, but it's not really fixing the underlying problem. So there's a transportation element of the road that we need to address. At the same time, we want to make sure that this project meets the needs of pedestrians and bus riders and bicyclists. Number one, because there's a bus route here, and I actually was out there doing a field view, I'd say maybe 3 months ago, and ran into a woman walking up and down the corridor. The bus left her off at the wrong bus stop, and she was trying to figure out which direction do I go in to get to this place I was going to. And she was frustrated, and poor one had to walk on, it was like March, and everything was super wet, and she's walking on dirt and grass to get around. So we know people are out there. We know people are taking the bus. They're getting off. They have places to go. And it's also just the county's good policy to say we need to make sure that our roads, to lead by example, are something that everybody can use. And we know that a lot of people, maybe not everybody in this room, maybe not everybody in your community, but more and more people are coming to us saying, I wish my neighborhood had sidewalks. I wish it was safe for my kids to bike, et cetera, et cetera. And so we want to make sure that our road was designed not just to improve the traffic, but to improve the quality of life for the community and all other types of users. And lastly, we had to balance all these things with the fact that we are, like I said, in a historic area with buildings close to the road. If we wanted to, we could try to go through and make this thing 6 or 7 lanes wide and destroy houses. We don't want to do any of that. Believe me, the quickest way to get a project done is to have the least amount of impacts to things. But we know at the same time, we are not going to be able to avoid all impacts. We're going to need right-of-way in some spots. We're going to need right-of-way to put in sidewalks in some spots, maybe not for the road, but for sidewalks. There are going to be impacts, but we're going to do everything we can to minimize them. And if there is a way in which we can minimize them even more by, putting in plantings and screening things and maybe trying to cut some corners here and there to make things fit a little better, we will try to do that. Because like I said, the more ground that we have to buy, the more properties we have to touch, the harder it is to get a project done. Our goal is to use 100% county funds so that we can get this thing done quickly rather than trying to use state and federal money and having it take another 10 or 15 years. So that's sort of the framework that I wanted to communicate to you guys about tonight. And just think of that as Paul goes through this presentation. And he's going to tell you a little bit about some of the details of the concept and where we are. And then after that, we'll open it up for question and answer. We'll try to answer every question we can as honestly, as truthfully as we can. And we'll even let everybody mill around and we'll talk more one-on-one after that if time permits. So with that, I'll turn it over to Paul. Like I said, Paul's with Gannett Fleming. He is our engineering project manager. And he'll go through and he'll give everything. And this was something I was alluding to, I think, to a couple people in the crowd. We own the entirety of Ridge Pike, and we have different projects in different places. But I'm not going to go into what all those other colors are. The only thing that you need to look at and focus on this map is letter G. That's Crescent to Philadelphia. That's the subject of this effort right here, which, like I said, uses 100% county funds.
Section G, as Matt said, is what you see in green. It's from Crescent Avenue to Northwestern. I'll give you some landmarks. Here is St. Peter's Church. Cemeteries on both sides. Hollids Hardware, its gift shop. Masonic Village. Barron Hill Road. Manor Road. The Eagle View Townhomes. And Northwestern Avenue, the city line. So what are our project goals? First and foremost would be to reduce congestion. As you know, in front of Hollids, the 2 lanes eastbound converges or merges down into 1 lane all the way to the city line eastbound. Another important goal is for safety improvements. Probably the most significant safety improvement would be to introduce signals where they're warranted. There are 2 traffic signals that are warranted that aren't there today. One's at Crescent Avenue and the other one is at Barron Hill Road. Another project goal would be to reconstruct the pavement. As Matt had said, it's quite old, falling apart. It's been overlaid just about 5 years ago and already is starting to show signs of distress. Another important goal would be to accommodate pedestrians and provide for transit users, sidewalks and bus stops. There's very little drainage. There's only 1 or 2 inlets on the entire stretch of Ridge Pike. And there's very little curbing, so that means rainwater just runs off of Ridge Pike right onto lawns and does create some erosion and flooding issues. And lastly, we would like to provide some aesthetic treatments to preserve the historic look and character of this area. This is the first roll plot you may have seen when you walked in. It details some of the existing conditions, some of the problems with Ridge Pike. I'll take you through this in thirds because it's kind of hard to see. Here we are at Crescent Avenue on the left, and there's no signal there today, as I mentioned. That would be warranted as a new signal. For the entire corridor, there is no sidewalks on either side of Ridge Pike. So this is the area where it drops from 2 lanes to 1 lane out front of Hollids Hardware. There's some alignment issues. When they've introduced left turn lanes, they basically do that by pushing the traffic to the right to introduce a left turn lane and then tapering them back to the left again. Well, that happens at the same time you're going over a hill at Barron Hill Road, and it's not really a good design. It's not what people expect, to have a sudden wiggle in the alignment as they're going over a hill. We'd like to straighten that out as part of the reconstruction. As I mentioned, there's some distressed pavement that's starting to fall apart in areas. And then there are some accident problems, of course, at all of the signals, whether they're signalized or not. Next third of the section would be at Barron Hill, between Barron Hill and Manor Road. We do have significant volumes of traffic. You may have mentioned or may have noticed on the roll plot that there's about 31,000 vehicles, average daily traffic between Barron Hill Road and the city line. To the west of Barron Hill Road, it's 21,000 vehicles, and Barron Hill itself actually has an average daily traffic of 10,000 vehicles. That's significant. Barron Hill Road does not have a traffic signal, and when we did our traffic counts, we easily found that to meet 1 or 2 warrants, so that qualifies to become a traffic signal. There are issues with bus stops. There's a bus stop across the street from the old entrance to Masonic Village, and there's no way to get to that bus stop. There are no sidewalks. There are some people that actually cross 3 lanes of traffic to get to that bus stop, some of them elderly. We'd like to correct that condition. East of Manor Road, another wiggle in the alignment when they introduced left turn lanes at Manor Road, and it happens again in a sag curve condition. Not as much of a problem when you're, as opposed to the crest curve or a hill, but still not a good alignment to have people move to the right, move to the left, and then right into a curve. We'd like to straighten that out as part of the reconstruction. And I mentioned drainage issues. This is one location where there's actually just a break in the curb and rainwater just rushes out of the curb and right onto a lawn and into a parking lot. And then again, there's no sidewalks for the entire length of the corridor. So I'm going to revisit the project goals and kind of show you why they are our goals. Widening, why would we want widening? It's not so much widening, it's actually adding the missing lane east between Hollids. Here's a typical situation on either on a bad day or when there's traffic on Schuylkill, or just if it's rainy, it slows traffic down, but it typically backs up quite a ways west of Church Road. Here we are, even actually west of Crescent Avenue. And that probably happens primarily because of the 2 lanes that merge to 1 out front of Hollids. A couple of shots showing you the backup. Here's on the right picture, traffic streaming along into 1 lane all the way up to Barron Hill. Traffic signals would be another important goal. Not just adding signals where there aren't signals, but improving the signals where we already have signals. Here's the signal at Church and Harts Lane. These are narrow roadways. It's going to be difficult to improve these except for perhaps moving these stop bars back so that it's a little bit easier to make a right-hand turn into those 2 streets. Here on the right slide, you see the difficulty a school bus has making its turn. In fact, the morning I took this shot, the whole string of cars, they all had to back up while the bus tried to make his turn. And of course, that just backs up Ridge Pike. Here's the traffic intersection, rather, at Barron Hill Road. Here's a truck trying to make a left-hand turn, just causing a backup on Barron Hill Road. And of course, we have plenty of signs that say don't block the intersection. Difficult to do in the afternoon when everybody is fighting for a position, or waiting for your courtesy gap to get in to Ridge Pike. Another goal is to reconstruct the pavement. As we mentioned, it was first built in the 30s, overlaid in the 1970s, widened in the 1970s, and overlaid as recently as 2011. But it's already showing signs of distress in various locations, potholes. And you can see here this joint. This is in front of the State Farm, all State Farm insurance near Harts Lane. And it's probably where it was widened a little bit with a different kind of pavement, and it's just a longitudinal crack that keeps opening up a few years after every time they re-overlay it. I mentioned these wiggles in the alignment that aren't really a good practice and should be cleaned up. And when we reconstruct, we can straighten these things out. I'm talking about where recently Manor Road, at the Manor Road intersection, a right turn lane was introduced for the new entrance into the Masonic Village. And you can, if you watch my mouse, I'll trace for you where the center dashed line used to be. Now it moves to the right. So you basically are shifting traffic to the right, and they have to straighten back, and then they go right into a curve to the right again. You combine that with wet pavement, a little bit of snow, and you can't see the lines. People get lost, and you can have some accidents. So when we reconstruct, we'll straighten all this out and make it a smoother, straighter alignment. And then another one just like it is at Banner Hill Road, but that wiggle is in combination with going over a curve, where you can't see what's over the curve. Well, what's over the curve is another wiggle and another curve to the right. Another goal, again, is to accommodate pedestrians and transit users. Here are some conditions where I mentioned the bus stop across from the Masonic Village and no sidewalk, no way to get to it safely. And here's other areas where there's a little shoulder on the road, but I don't think you want to walk in the road when they're trying to kind of driving too fast. It's also very narrow, not much of a shoulder. You wouldn't want to walk in a shoulder. You want to walk on a sidewalk, but there's no sidewalks here. It's a steep slope, there's shrubbery, there's poles in the way. We want to correct that as well. Another goal is to improve stormwater management and drainage along the corridor. As I said, there's only a couple of inlets. And some of them don't even have any kind of curbing behind them to direct the water into the inlet, so the water just kind of runs around the inlet and runs across lawns or down other driveways. And on the right is another slide here where there's actually a break in the curb, and the water is allowed to just rush onto the lawn and onto a parking lot. We would correct that by adding new drainage systems, new pipes, new inlet boxes to collect the water and convey it to a proper stream or waterway or basin. Because we need to now satisfy newer requirements that weren't in place when Ridge Pike was built for stormwater management, infiltration, things of that nature. Oh, and of course, our goal is to also preserve the historic nature of Lafayette Hill, and we do that because there are 3 eligible resources within this corridor of Ridge Pike. The first is the Barron Hill Historic District. It kind of begins at the edge of the cemetery, St. Peter's Cemetery, and extends all the way to the edge of Masonic Village, but it's only on the north side of Ridge Pike. It does not cross over to the south side. And that's important because in order to put a sidewalk through, we have to widen at least one side of Ridge Pike in the area where there's retaining walls or masonry walls for the cemetery on both sides of Ridge Pike. Since the historic district does not extend on the south side, it's possible for us to relocate the wall that's on the south side of Ridge Pike and put a sidewalk through that area. Another eligible historic resource is the 4-way farm, which could be developed shortly. Atria and TC Properties are in the process of land development. And then the last historic resource is the Faulkner-Levering Rath House, which is set back a ways from Ridge Pike and will not be impacted by this project. Here's a couple of shots of the historic district on the north side of Ridge Pike, and here is the St. Peter's Cemetery that's west of Harts Lane and Church Road, and another shot of the similar wall that's on the east side of Church Road, and then some of the vintage houses from the 1800s. So I'm going to go over with you some of the improvement concepts. This is the same roll plot that's on the table behind most of you that are seated. Between Crescent Avenue and Barron Hill Road, we propose a continuous sidewalk to connect to the sidewalk that's near Pine Ridge Road, and that would run all the way east to the city line at Northwestern Avenue. The addition of a traffic signal at Crescent Avenue. Improvements to the existing traffic signal at Church and Harts Lane. Those improvements could be timings, improve signing, because it's hard to read the street name signs, and pulling stop bars back to allow right turns to have a little bit easier time getting into those side streets. Of course, then the addition of the eastbound lane, so you have 2 lanes all the way to Philadelphia. The improvements of the alignment, as I mentioned, straighten out the little wiggle in the alignment. And stormwater management, possibly a basin at the rear of property owned by the Smith family. This is what the cross-section would look like between Crescent and Barron Hill. 2 lanes each way. The inside lanes would be 11 feet. The outside lanes, 13 feet, because they're up against the curb. It's good practice to have a couple of extra feet since you're up against an obstruction, a vertical curb. And here's the existing wall that would be relocated back approximately 8 to 10 feet to fit in a sidewalk divided by a 3-foot grass buffer strip. And in that buffer strip is where you could typically relocate your utility poles and street signing. The next portion of the road is from Barron Hill to Banner Road. There's that same realignment I mentioned. And I also mentioned, too, that a new signal. Barron Hill is warranted to become a traffic signal. And that's quite a volume of traffic that turns right to go east, or the return movement to turn left to go on the Barron Hill. And to not have a big impact on the operation of that traffic signal, we're proposing to have 2 right turn lanes on Barron Hill to go east onto Ridge Pike. That will give you the maximum amount of green time you can keep onto Ridge Pike. And then again, the continuous sidewalk, as I mentioned. We talked about bus stops. We would recommend bus stops at Manor Road rather than where they're located now, which is across the entrance from Masonic Village. Stormwater management improvements, there's a possibility of maybe enlarging the existing basin here at Masonic's entrance, and possibly between the entrance road of the golf course and the intersection of Manor and Ridge Pike. A basin could be put in there. The new signal at Manor Road, it's operating as it was designed, but if we add additional signals along the corridor, it could be retimed and interconnected with all of the signals, so they sort of talk to each other. They could even be what they call adaptive signals. It's a new technology. It uses cameras that actually views traffic and changes its timings depending on demand, keep traffic flowing, and can regulate speeds in a sense that would be no advantage to you to hurry up to the next traffic signal because there might be another platoon of cars that's already queued up. I don't want to get into too many details, but it's a new technology. If you've been in King of Prussia, between the mall and Bridgeport, there's a 2 or 3 mile stretch of traffic signals that all have this new technology, adaptive signals. And it works certain times of the day when you used to be at almost every traffic light, hitting a red light, you now run smoothly all through all of them. And this is the typical section for that stretch. Let me back up for just a second. As I mentioned, these 2 signals now have a left turn lane, but they're so closely spaced, we're just going to maintain that 11-foot lane that's in the middle that becomes those 2 left turn lanes. So here's the typical section for this stretch of the highway. 11-foot through lanes, inside lanes, 13-foot outside lanes, as we showed on the previous cross-section near the walls, but here's that center area which acts as the left turn lanes at the 2 traffic signals. And then the buffer and the sidewalk. The last section is from Manor to Northwestern Avenue. And there's that wiggle in the alignment I mentioned that will straighten out as part of reconstruction. Continue the sidewalk to the city line. And we had a drainage issue up here that we'll rectify by closing the curb, putting in more inlets. This is the typical section in this area. 11-foot inside lanes, 13-foot outside lanes, buffer and sidewalk. Now, this would require some cutting into the adjacent properties in order to fit this in, because in this area, the ground is kind of elevated on the south side. We did have one board at the back. This talks about our project schedule. Currently, we are halfway through preliminary design. We probably have another 9 months to go. We'll take all of your comments and give them careful consideration, make some adjustments where we can, and we'll meet with you again and perhaps about January, February of next year. And if all goes well, we'll move into final design, which could take another 18 months. And construction could and then we have the bidding process and finding a contractor. Construction could begin as early as 2019 and possibly take 2 years to construct. We would construct it always by maintaining traffic on Ridge Pike, always maintaining access to buildings, properties, owners, businesses, and homes. But that makes the intersections a little tricky. There may be instances where you need to have a short-term detour at one of the intersections in order to actually build the intersection. That's our presentation.
Thank you all again for coming out tonight. It's 8 o'clock, so our official time here is evening, but I am going to introduce our newest County Commissioner, Joe Gale, and he's going to wrap things up for us.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you all for coming out this evening. I'm Joe Gale. I'm the newest member of the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners. I took office January 4th of this year, so July 4th will be 6 months. And I'm also a lifelong resident of Plymouth Township. I live right down the street by the Plymouth Meeting Mall. You know, I like to hear from you not only tonight, to continue the dialogue, continue the communication after we leave here tonight. And we have an open door to hear your suggestions, your input, because you know what's best. You live along Ridge Pike, you live on the streets off of Ridge Pike. You know what it's like on a daily basis. So myself and Matt Edmond, you know, I'm on the 8th floor of One Montgomery Plaza in Norristown. He's on the 2nd floor. You know, please continue to reach out to us with your input. We appreciate you for coming out tonight, and hopefully it'll be a smooth process moving forward. So thank you.
So as I stated before, that wraps up our presentation and the question and answer period for tonight. Thanks to Matt and to Paul and to Commissioner Gale for helping us out here. You do have the comment forms. You can go on the website to provide more information. We will definitely be looking at the comment forms when you put them in. As Commissioner Gale said, you can give us a call. My number's not up there, but if you call Matt and don't get him, I'm second in line. So I will get your call eventually. Please do continue to stay involved. It is a busy roadway. 30,000 vehicles a day is not a small, insignificant roadway. There's nothing that we can do to make those cars disappear. So we have to accommodate the traffic that we have coming at us, and that is a tall task. So stay tuned. We have more preliminary design to get through before we finally get into the design of the final improvements, and we will be in touch with you again. Thank you very much for coming out tonight.
Thank you.